If you've never tried hooking up or using an old cassette deck, it may seem a little bit confusing, and that's totally fair, especially if you didn't grow up around them. So today, instead of showcasing a single piece of equipment like I usually do, I thought I'd do my best to try to demystify setting up a cassette deck for anybody who's not familiar with how it all works. So stick around, this one's a little bit of a rabbit hole. So this, and this, and this is a cassette deck. If you're watching this, I'm guessing you probably either just bought one or are thinking of buying one. Since I don't know how much or how little you already know, let's start at the beginning. To use one of these, you need an amplifier or receiver, like one of these, or maybe one of these. Amps are necessary because tape decks don't have anywhere to attach speakers. Let's start with this little Pioneer amp. And how about this Pioneer tape deck? They're smaller and lighter. The next thing you need is a pair of speakers. We'll just use these little realistic Minimus 7s. Now, every amp hooks up a little bit differently when it comes to speakers. This one uses these little plugs, and the speakers, in this case, take a bare wire connection. Remember to match the polarities, so if the top wire hooks to the red on one speaker, do the same on the other. Simple enough. Now, let's take a look at the tape deck. These are different from other pieces of equipment in one crucial way. Unlike every other type of component in a stereo system, record player, CD player, radio tuner, all of which only output a signal, these are meant to receive a signal as well. You'll have two pairs of RCA jacks labeled input and output, or record and play. Some decks are hardwired like this, but the inputs and outputs are the same. Now, the first thing we have to do is hook everything up. Fortunately, in most cases, your amp and tape deck will be clearly labeled. You'll need two pairs of red and white stereo RCA cables if they're not already built in. On the back of your amp, you'll have all of your RCA inputs and outputs. For now, we can ignore everything but the tape ports. Every amp is a little different with respect to labeling, but they'll always at least specify tape, hopefully. Depending on which amp or receiver you have, you may have more than one tape hookup. This particular amp has two. I'll explain what the additional ones are for in a minute, but for now, we're going to use tape 1. This is where I notice a lot of people online getting tripped up. The labels are not universal, even between models of the same brand. These two Pioneers use different labels for the same thing. So let's pull up a diagram to make things a little bit easier. Here's your tape deck, and here's your amp. And let's add some speakers. Nice and simple. If you just want to listen to a pre-recorded album on cassette, it's just like any other piece of equipment. The audio signal starts at the tape player, goes to the amp, where it's then sent to the speakers. That's very simple and only uses one set of RCA cables going from the tape's output to the amp's input. However, it gets a little bit more complicated if you want to record tapes. First, we need something to record. Let's use a CD player. Now, we need to get the signal from the CD player to the tape deck. You could, in theory, hook the CD player directly to the cassette deck, but then you couldn't just play CDs normally because the CD player isn't hooked directly to your amplifier. So instead, we hook the CD player to the amp, then add a second cable from the amp to the tape deck to send it up for recording. You still have the signal going from the CD player to the amp and out to the speakers. But now, you're also sending that signal up to the tape player at the same time. The tape deck will then send that signal back down to the amp through the play/output/monitor cable. The amp is then able to output either the original CD player signal or the output of the tape deck through the speakers. And critically, it will always only send the original CD signal up to the tape deck. The reason they do it this way, instead of just adding another mode to the selector switch on your amp to hear the tape output, is because you need to be able to monitor the signal going to your tape deck when it's recording something. You need to be able to hear it and compare the original signal to the recorded one to make sure that it's correct. That wouldn't be possible if you were flipping the input switch, because every time you did, it would cut the signal to the tape deck and you'd just be recording silence. That's why they give you a separate control switch on your amp labeled tape monitor. When it's off, whatever original signal is coming from your other equipment will play normally through the speakers and be sent up to the tape deck. When you turn the monitor switch on, it will only output whatever is coming from the tape deck to the speakers. So if you just want to play a tape, that's easy. You just turn on the monitor and play your tape, and that's really straightforward. When you're recording, depending on what kind of tape deck you have, chances are it'll do one of two things. Either it'll play the tape in real time as you're recording it so you can hear what ends up on the tape itself, or it'll output the processed signal it's applying to the tape and you kind of have to trust that the recording is right. If it's reading from the tape itself, it's going to have a dedicated playback head inside the tape mechanism. Those are 3 head decks because there's an erase head, a recording head, and a playback head. If there's only one head doing double duty as both recording and playback, you won't be able to hear the recording itself as it's happening since the head is already occupied, so instead, the deck gives you the raw signal that it's sending to the tape as a reference. I know I'm making this out to sound really complicated. In practice, it's really simple. Another way to look at it is this. This one goes out, so it needs to hook to this one because it goes in. Then this one comes back out, so it hooks to this one, which goes back in. Out, in, out, in. So let's talk a little about recording tapes because there's a reason you need to monitor the recording. Tapes are kind of finicky. I did a breakdown on why in a previous video, so if you want to see that and you don't mind me with long hair, you can check out that video. But suffice to say, it's easy to record either too soft or too loud, which will make your mixtape sound terrible. That's why the tape deck has a recording level adjustment and meters so you can find that Goldilocks zone that gives you a nice sounding recording. So now let's talk about that second tape input, tape 2. There's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to just try to chip away at it piece by piece. The overall idea is that you can record from one tape to another, but there are quirks and limitations to that ability. For example, on most amps, you can record from tape 1 to tape 2, but not the other direction. If you think about how the signal path is more or less linear, that sort of makes sense, right? Here's a stack of 2 cassette decks and an amp. It's the Sanyo from the previous video, the Pioneer CT F505, and this Kenwood KX40. And we need a signal source, so let's use this Sony D5. Sepultura seems fitting today. Everything is all wired up in the back as you can see. We'll turn everything on, drop a couple blank tapes into the decks and cue them up for recording by pressing pause, then record and play on both decks. Now I'll hit play on the CD. The monitor buttons are both in the off positions. So right now, the signal coming from the CD player is going directly to the speakers and also going to both decks. Note the bouncing input level meters on both decks. As I adjust the record level on one deck, you'll see that it doesn't affect the other deck or the speaker output. But now, let me engage the first monitor switch. Now the audio signal is going from the CD player, through the amp, to the first deck, then back out to the amp and being routed to the speakers and to the second deck. Watch, as I adjust the record level on the first deck, it also changes the levels on the second one. You can also hear the difference through the speakers. But watch as I adjust the second deck. It still doesn't affect the first deck nor the speakers. Now let's switch the buttons. I'll disengage the first monitor and engage the second one. Now, as I adjust the first deck, the second one isn't affected, and neither is the speaker output. But if I adjust the second deck, it will also be audible through the speakers. So essentially, deck 2 is now ignoring whatever deck 1 is doing. This is how you would use each deck independently to play or record. However, if I engage both buttons, watch what happens. Because the signal now has a full path through both decks before being output through the speakers, if I adjust the first deck, it affects both the second deck and the speakers, and if I adjust the second deck, it now also affects the speakers. You can kind of visualize that path that it takes. So now, let's see what it looks like when you want to just copy one tape to another. The CD player is off. We'll put a pre-recorded tape in the first deck and keep the blank one in the second deck. Let's start with both monitors off. I'll cue up the second deck and hit play on the first. Even though both are hooked up, deck 2 isn't receiving a signal and no sound is coming out of the amp. That's because the monitors are off. The speakers are connected to what this switch would be outputting, which in this case is nothing. If I engage the first monitor, now I can hear what this deck is playing. The input knob does nothing because it only affects incoming signals, not the tape itself. Some decks have an output volume knob, but we're not going to complicate things with that. If I adjust this record level knob on deck 2, you see the effects on its meters, but you don't hear anything. Now let's engage monitor 2 as well. Now I can hear what's going from this deck, through here, to this deck, then back out to the amp and out to the speakers. Now I can make sure the levels are correct, and I can start recording one tape to the other. As long as monitor 1 is engaged, deck 2 will always get a signal from deck 1, and you can switch the speaker's output between either deck's output without interrupting the recording. What you don't want to do is this. If you turn off monitor 1 while you're dubbing from one tape to the other, you'll cut the signal going from the second deck and screw up your recording. Watch. See how the second deck loses the signal when I disengage monitor 1? if something else like the radio was playing, every time I turned off monitor 1, it would just start recording whatever's on the radio, which is probably not what you want. Now, it's helpful to remember that tape decks will always output something when they're recording. It's up to the amp, and by extension you, to either use that signal or block it depending on what you're trying to do. So let's look at one other variable you might encounter. To do that, I need the reel-to-reel deck. 1 second. This is a source and monitor switch. If your tape deck has this feature, it allows you to manually select what's coming out of the back of the deck between the input signal from the amp and whatever the playhead is reading off of the tape itself. Any deck that doesn't have that feature just automatically plays from the tape when you press play. I'm not going to go into how to record a tape because I've shown that on several different videos already, and if I do, it'll make this video painfully long and even more redundant. So we'll skip that for now. If you want me to do a more comprehensive video on just recording tapes, let me know in the comments. So every amp is different, and every tape deck is different. They all behave a little differently and are labeled slightly differently. Hopefully, having watched this video, you should be able to figure out how to hook everything up and how to get everything working with your new vintage tape deck. Remember, if you have only one deck, hook it to tape 1 on your amp and you can record tapes from other sources. If you have a second deck, it goes on tape 2. If you're going to record anything, the one you're planning on recording with should be on tape 2 so that you can also record from other tapes. Other than that, if you have any questions or need help, please feel free to leave a comment and I can hopefully help you out. Also, if anybody has any helpful hints, I invite you to share them as well. Thank you for sitting through this, and I hope I made things just a little bit more clear for you. I'll see you the next time, and keep thrifting.